All right, we're recording. It's August 23, and we are well on our way to V1 Alpha 2. I wanted to, before we get too far into this, I wanted to highlight a discussion Harry and I had in the main Slack channel, I think a few hours ago. Harry, you mentioned that extension ref for route matches is a rather confusing thing right now that we may want to consider removing. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, and the reason for removing is it's sort of odd the way it's structured right now. Violates some of our principles. It's complicated for implementations to actually use it. So we introduced it, but I don't think we have like good use cases of how we envision it will be used. And another reason is I think it's just clunky. Like we haven't seen matching criteria separate from the route resource anywhere in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So if we can start smaller and again add that backend later on, I think that would be that's the proposal, that we remove it. If these come up again and we understand the use cases, we add them back in future.
Yeah, my great. Yeah, my perspective here is that this was a solution in search of a problem, and we still have not found the problem that it solves. So everything we've been talking about for V1 Alpha 2 is if something is unclear, confusing, not used, we should probably remove it. I think this is a good example of this being something to remove.
Sorry, I came in late. The proposal is to move extension ref because no implementer is currently using this at the moment.
Specifically for route matches,
right. I see.
And I think also it's just because the way that that it works is a bit confusing and unclear. Like you having an extra CRD for matching of this kind is weird, and it feels like I had a very quick look at the spec list and I was like, yeah, I don't even know how I'd go about implementing this. So it feels like one of the ones where it feels safer to take it out for now, and then because then it's not a breaking change to remove it. Again, we're trying to get the break, with the idea being put the breaking changes in V1 Alpha 2 and then bring in additive changes later.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to take a look to see, refresh my, it's been such a long time since we
yeah, this is one that has kind of snuck along for a long time, and I'm glad that Harry brought it up. To me, it feels like it suffers from a lot of the same problems we've been trying to avoid. That the race conditions involved here of, okay, this calls out to a different CRD. What if that doesn't exist? What if it changes? How do you propagate those change? I don't know.
I don't know if that's actually an issue.
Sure.
Right. Like, I think it's more that this might be hedging too much.
Yeah.
So are people satisfied with the current set of matches that are proposed? I think this was a carve out just because we knew that there were lots of implementation specific matching algorithms, and we just wanted to be sure that we didn't end up accidentally locking people away from what they wanted to do with their configurations.
One of my concerns here is that this leaves us with essentially nothing for L4 routing, and in terms of matching, which may be an accurate state of where we are. I don't think anyone has implemented any kind of custom matching based on this, or I don't know of any plans to. But that is something like I think we probably need some kind of solution for custom matching. But right now I would say for myself, I'm not sure that what we have is a reasonable approach. And with the idea that I would rather remove things now that we're unsure of and add them later when we have a clearer use case, I would support removing this at this point. just so we have a clearer path to beta, beyond V1 Alpha 2 that is not breaking.
Yeah, I mean, just take HTTP route, for example. Let's say you have header paths and query parameter, some matches in there. And let's say there is a metadata field that is not possible there. Now, expecting that some implementer would introduce that via different CRD, and you'll have this split between these core matching criterias and then this CRD, that doesn't feel right. I don't think any user would enjoy that. And then in terms of like L4 routing, I think we haven't taken a position that we do not want to introduce more matching criterias. It's just that we do not understand them. So we would love to if we understand them, and we'll put them in, right? But port forwarding itself is, I think, a big and a major use case that we are addressing already.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Me too. So I think Bowie just had to duck away, but it seemed like he needed to be convinced yet. So I think we got 3+1s.
Yeah. Well, we'll try and remember to come back to this one when Bowie shows back up, but it seems like this is a reasonable direction to go into. Harry, are you volunteering to take on the implementation of this?
I can. What's the timeline?
Yeah, well, let's revisit that when we get to RC1, and we'll figure it out. But
I mean,
I'm not sure.
If you give me until this Friday, then I'll do it. Otherwise, if it's more urgent, then somebody else can step up for sure.
Okay.
I think for that sort of removal, though, I don't think it should block the RC, because the important parts about the RC are all of the route changes and the other stuff we've already done.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can have an RC2 if we need to. So I don't think it should block the RC. So just in terms of that, but yeah, let's talk about the milestone and that sort of stuff first.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I would say I'm aware of anyone who's actually using extension ref for anything right now. So I can't imagine removing it in a second RC breaking anything, but who knows? Okay, so V1 Alpha 2 milestone is something I wanted to cover. This is incomplete. I meant to add a couple more things into this milestone, but I kind of wanted to just run through this and make sure that we're not missing anything too much. There's obviously the API review process that's going on right now. That's, I think, PR 780. I don't know. It's got tons of comments, but this is very much underway right now. This one, we need V1 Alpha 1 equivalent examples for V1 Alpha 2. I think someone had volunteered to take this one on, but I forget who is actually doing it.
I think this task is going on. So in previous meeting, we are talking about migrating all the examples on the V1 Alpha 1 to V1 Alpha 2. I was working with Yang on some of the examples, YAML files. Well, is that the thing we are talking about?
Yeah, the issue that Jameen and I are working on that's in the milestone, where we're updating examples, or rather the guides, we're also updating examples for the guides.
Okay, great. So that should cover a lot of these. Is there any kind of umbrella work for whatever isn't currently included in an example? Is anyone included in documentation? Is anyone working on those? Or does anyone want to be?
Thought they were all included, but I could be wrong. Sorry.
You're right. I mean, all those examples, YAML files, as well as the guides under the site RC directory will keep updating and being reviewed.
Okay. Okay. So it seems, I don't know if I can assign. No, I can't. I guess you need to be a member. But we know who's actually working on this. It's Shane and is it Jimin? Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yeah, for easy, you can just call me Susan. I mean,
okay, Susan.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think this is in a good place then. And let me know if I can help out with any of this. Thank you for all the help in getting these updated. This, I guess, is really the same thing. Thank you. Oh, I guess I can assign both of you. I'll go back and do that to the other one too. The SNI binding and bypass for TLS listeners. This one got stuck somewhere. What's this? James, are you on this call? What is, or who's working on this?
This is basically clarifying. This is clarifying what we're doing about domain fronting, and
Yeah.
you know, if the SNI binding needs to match the host name. I think that it's this is basically we just got to document like that. It's something like if you got a TLS host name, the HTTP host name has to match the TLS host name. Is kind of where it goes to at the end of the day. We need to write that down as a must. I think. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, great. James or Nick, or
Sorry,
either of you?
And what do we do when they don't match? Because the browser doesn't follow that, right? It actually does have mismatch when it.
Yeah. So. Yep. You can definitely run into problems with connection coalescing and 421 responses in if you don't do this. Sorry. We had to do a bunch of fixes in Contour to handle this case. So that's why I think we make it so that it's they must match is in the spec, and that means that the spec doesn't currently support doing domain fronting, which I think is probably okay, and then that the spec mandates that those things must match, and then not having them match is an error. Does that sound okay, John?
I'm not quite sure, because we can't just say that what browsers do are invalid because everyone uses browsers, right?
So no, so what it is if they don't match and you're holding open a HTTP2 connection, and you send a thing to one that doesn't match, the implementation should respond with a 421 to send it off to say no, retry this. So we can what I'm saying is that we shouldn't accept config that lets them not match, so that code path in the browser would never be hit. If you see what I'm saying, like that.
No, I don't know how we can reject the config from ever existing.
What I'm saying is that there would be a rule that says if you're specifying a host name in the TLS, which you do have to, and you've got a host name, any host names in the TLS and in a HTTP route must match.
I think that's already part of the spec, right? But what's not part is they both are like star.example.com in both of them. And then they SNI's foo.example.com and the hostname bar.example.com.
Yep.
Because the spec already has like the handshake between the HTTP route hostname and the listener hostname.
Okay. So I will have a careful read of the spec and see. I think, yeah, as you say, because we've got that match, there's not actually a breaking change. It's a thing that says that's maybe on the HTTP route that's like, please make sure that you do the correct behavior by the RFC. That will mean that people who use Safari get broken. If you use Safari, the mobile version of Safari or the other versions of Safari, Safari does not respect 421s properly. Yeah, there's a weird behavior there, but we should do to the RFCs. Basically, I think this needs to be updated to be like, in the event that you have a HTTP2 connection open and you've got a mismatch thing, then you must send a 421 as per the RFC. That's what browsers expect. Does that make sense, John?
Yeah, it does. Although if I remember the spec right, it is a bit more nuanced with actually the certificates that are involved actually play a role. It's not just SNI and hostname.
I know, but I'm trying
but
to
in
make
general,
it so
yeah, it's like the deepest, it's like the deepest rabbit hole ever. But at a high level, it does make sense.
Yeah, Yeah. That's like I'm kind of trying to avoid having to go all the way down the rabbit hole as part of this spec. Okay.
So if you're using HTTP2 and you have that situation, I believe you may send a go away response, and I think that will make Safari do the right thing. But is that
Yeah.
something that we should codify here in Gateway API?
No, so I think that the thing that we should codify is that you should generally work towards the RFC, and that assign me, Rob. You should work towards the RFC, and that if you've got the 2 wildcard case, then use this RFC for guidance. It's probably the best we can do. Like we've already got stuff to say, like they need to match if you're specifying things, but you're right, John, that in the case that you're specifying 2 wildcards, that's weird. Like that works in a weird way. I mean, we could say you can't specify 2 wildcards. That also seems weird. So I'll have a think about that and write something up.
Okay, I will look forward to that PR. I lost track of that partway through, but yeah, looking forward to the PR, and we can continue discussion there.
I will try and explain it in a not too difficult to understand kind of way.
Sounds good.
It is a very deep rabbit hole though.
Yes. Great, thanks. The last one, V1 Alpha 2 feedback. This is a great umbrella issue that John had taken on. I know we've had some discussion on here, but it's not clear who is actually following up with all of these different ones. This is a fairly big umbrella issue, which is good. Does anyone feel like they have enough capacity to take on some or all of these items? I don't know if anyone's looked at this yet.
I'll have some capacity, just not
Okay.
not right away. What we're trying to get these done in time for the in like a week, basically, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good goal. Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff is, John, you're probably most familiar with this issue. Do you think any of these should block an RC1?
No, if I remember right, most of them are pretty small.
Yeah,
Most of them are really docs for the most part.
that's my what I remember here too. And my goal for RC1 is really to try and make as many API changes as possible before we cut an RC. But docs can be, well, even if it's Go docs, they can be cleaned up as we go. And there's lots of ambiguous parts of our documentation.
I feel like the biggest one is the parent ref scope change.
Yep, I would agree. Everything else is docs, it seems like, except the CRD one, but we already fixed that. The scope would be removing a field. So that's.
Well, I doubt I'll be able to do all of them, but for my part, once I'm done with some of the documentation stuff I'm doing now, which may have some overlap actually, I'll just go through the checklist and I'll make a comment when I grab something. I think probably a few of us should grab some things, but yeah, I'll definitely try to pull some out of the list.
This one,
I'm happy to write up something about the scope.
Yeah, this feels like something that although it's small in scope, I guess it is going to be challenging to change. This is something.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, this is something that Dan had also called out as something that did not make sense to him during the API review. So I know this is an issue that not everyone likes, but I think we'll need to convince API machinery that scope does not make sense if we do want to change this. And that seems like it could be a challenging conversation to have. But I can start a thread on the API machinery mailing list and see where it goes.
Yeah, I think that's actually probably a better way to do it, Rob. Yeah, I think we need to, you're right, we need to, API machinery asked for it, so we gotta convince them that
Yeah.
we don't need it.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, I will, it sounds like Shane is gonna spend some time on these ones, and I have some time to work on these, and anyone else just pick some of these off and comment when you start working on them. Or Susan, did you say you also had some time to work on this?
Yes, yeah, I can spend some time. Actually, I'm interested in parent reference code with redundant, but I'm not quite sure about the context key there. Maybe I can have an offline discussion with you about the scope of that item. Yeah, I would like to spend time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Somehow I screwed up the assignees, but I will try and fix that up in a little bit. But yeah, I just feel free to ask me any questions and I'll try and help out.
Sounds great.
Great, thanks. All right. So we keep on coming to this RC1 timing. Actually, no, it could be helpful to go through this. Out of curiosity, is this PR taking forever to load for everyone else, or is it just, I know, Harry, you've been having issues loading this feedback PR. Is it an issue for anyone else?
It definitely takes a long time to load.
Yeah,
but it does load.
I've had mixed luck with this one. Sometimes it gets into this state and comments never load. Sometimes, but whatever. If it's working for people, there are still a lot of comments that are not resolved. I think I've got maybe half of them covered in this PR now, which is a good chunk. But there are still more to go through here. And I certainly didn't want to monopolize updating. Yeah, I know we really do need a contact at GitHub to help this out. This has got to be a good edge case for them to test things on. But yeah, I certainly don't want to monopolize responding to the feedback here. I know there's been others that have been commenting and responding, which has been very helpful. But if others want to take on chunks of this PR in terms, yeah, okay, this happens too. That would also be very, very welcome. Before I go any further about this upstream PR that won't, this base PR that won't load, I want to highlight this PR. I think this is nearly complete. I've responded to, I think, all the feedback, and it could use another round of review for anyone who's looked at it. This is a pretty broad scope, and then it just tries to cover a lot of the feedback we've received in that other PR. Obviously not everything, but I think it gets us to a much closer state. There are a couple API changes. Maybe there's more, and I think this is it. One, no such gateway class is removed. It was deprecated in V1 Alpha 1, and I meant to remove it in V1 Alpha 2, but missed. So that's gone now. And then I forget whose feedback this was, but there's a routes field on listener that was suggested to be removed to allowed routes, which seems more accurate. So I renamed that as part of this change as well, based on feedback in 780. I think those are the major ones. There's a lot of GoDoc cleanup and variety of things like that, but these are, well, specifically this one would be the one that would stick out, I think. Yeah, so that's the progress on this. If anyone has time to follow up and review this, I'd love to get it in soon.
I think the biggest reason to do that is that once you've done that, then you can resolve all of the comments that are.
Yes.
That will reduce the number of comments and hopefully reduce the loading time for the page.
I am very excited to resolve these comments. There's, yeah, and I hope it actually does reduce the loading time significantly, but we'll see.
I have spoken to some people at GitHub about this sort of thing before, because they say that the KK repo is extremely challenging for this sort of thing. Yeah, So yeah, the impression that I got was the more that you can resolve comments and stuff like that, the better, because those are lazy fetched.
That's good to know. Okay, well, yeah, all the more reason to do this then. So if anyone has time to do another round of review on this, I think it's awfully close. And then I've got a bunch of comments on there that I can go ahead and resolve. With that said, I really wanted to split up the rest of the changes. There's a couple huge ones in there that I haven't touched yet. One is one that I've been trying to stay away from forever, and I actually got the order of this wrong. But Tim has pointed out, unfortunately, that it is time for us to switch from kind to resource, and it has finally made it into API conventions. And as much as I have tried to push back against this, it seems like it is inevitable. So I chatted with Daniel Smith today too, just to make sure that, we already had a V1 Alpha 1 that started with kind, and I thought that might be enough to allow us to stay there. But the strong preference is for us to move this API to resource. It as a way, so all our object refs that currently use kind should move to using resource to match the latest set of API conventions. Not my favorite change in the world, but it is something that I guess is required for us to meet the official API spec, become an official API. So given that,
I had to step away for a second, so I'll catch up on the recording. But are we the first ones to do this? Because it seems like a kind of annoying change.
It is an annoying change. I was really hoping to avoid it. There are some small APIs out there, but I think that for a number of users, we are going to be the first API they encounter that uses resource as a means.
And they're not backfilling this? Like, this is going to be...
That is my understanding from my conversation with Daniel, that yes, this is not, there are no plans to backfill. So
in that case, like, do client Go controller runtime, do they support it? Because if they don't, then like implementations is a nightmare.
My understanding is that they do, but that's a good question. I've not confirmed that.
I think the other thing that's a problem here, right, is that it's weird for users. Like, when you create a Kubernetes object, you create a kind, and you point to the kind, and then you say resource. It's like, what the hell is that? Like, I understand that there are reasons.
Is there a guide that they're giving people? Because it's like kind of like an edict without sort of any help.
I
ask them for like hey, this is how you explain it to people. Hey, this is like lots of docs to kind of publicize this. This is kind of sort of like a submarine legal change.
So Micaiah just said that OpenShift has been doing this for a while. Can you talk a little bit about the experience there? Like, is it that big a change for users to move to using resource from kind?
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't heard any complaints.
Oh, that's good. So if you can just say secret instead of secret, then like it's probably fine. That was my concern, is that if someone has messed something up and the kind is different to the resource, that would suck.
Yeah, I think we're generally pretty tolerant if you use capital S secret instead of lowercase s secrets. So maybe that's covered over some instances where people are still putting the kind instead of the resource name.
Oh, interesting.
I thought that it has to be lowercase because that's how the URL is.
Right.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be, but I think I'd have to check, but I think we automatically convert in some cases.
That's kind of wrong, maybe. I don't know.
True.
Yeah, I think Harry's right. We need to definitely open an issue to track this. But yeah, I think it feels to me like it's not really avoidable if it's like, if we're not going to pass the API review unless we do it. Like, but
yeah,
that it'll
if
be.
we're going to do it,
Sorry, Joe.
Sorry, go
Okay.
ahead. I thought you were done.
So I was just gonna say, like every time you have to do it, you have to remember to do secrets instead of secret and that sort of thing. Like it'll be a little bit to get used to, I think. Sorry, over to you.
Is this, sorry, Rob, your discussion with Daniel Smith and all the API, is this like a blog post? Like, there should be a huge announcement.
You would think it would be a huge announcement, but it doesn't really affect users until an API actually follows the guidelines. And unfortunately, I think we're going to be the first big one to do. Yeah, well, I
Right,
guess
but
big is relative, but yeah.
Okay, we should definitely discuss with them because it's like, it's whole ecosystem impacting, right? Like,
yeah,
we just happen
agree.
to be swept up into it.
Yep. Okay, well, let me, so it seems like we need an issue for sure. We can either mention some SIG API machinery people on that issue or send out another thread to API machinery about this as well. This is really, I think, secondary. The other concern for API machinery is the scope in the namespace reference, well, to distinguish between namespace and cluster scope references. Yeah, and Micaiah has a reference for the PR, and there's also a PR that updates API conventions that came a little bit later that clarified. So this discussion has been going on with API machinery for quite a while. It just seems like it hasn't been widely used or implemented yet, is my read on it, but I could be wrong. Yeah. Okay, so this is, I can follow up on this one. But anyone else, if you have strong, maybe I'll follow up with an issue right after this. And if you have strong rationale, reasoning.
I just logged in Tuesday.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Harry. And based on that, or there's already an issue. Okay. Whatever. If we can add our strongest concerns about this switch to that issue, I can send an email off to API Machinery Group and reference that. Maybe we can have any kind of concerns we have sometime today on that issue, and then we can try and get some feedback from API Machinery and just keep that discussion going. What I'm hearing here is that this is something like that none of us are excited about, and we'd like to at least see if we can survive without it. But we will do it if we have to, obviously. Yeah. Ed, does that sound good to everyone? Just comment on the issue with thoughts and all, and we can follow up on the mailing list afterwards. Cool. Okay. Another big change that potential change that came out of the V1 Alpha 2 review that I wanted to highlight. I know there's 200 some comments on that PR now, so it's hard to keep track of everything on there. Tim had suggested moving to a ports struct on gateway listener. This is something that I think originally came from feedback from Cal that I could be misunderstanding this, but I think he was asking about all ports, and that's kind of where I followed up from there, and that's where the conversation ended up going on that thread. And all ports being the ability to support all ports, or maybe even port ranges at some point, being another potential here. And that those conversations are ongoing in Kubernetes upstream. And one of the things that Tim pointed out in his feedback on our APIs, who's reviewing Gateway, is that we don't want to lock ourselves into a corner by having a single port int that we do right now. And instead, we may want to have a port struct that starts with only an int, but gives us room to expand beyond that. For example, to have some kind of Boolean in the future that says all ports, or to have some range support or something, you know, to give us space to expand this API. I don't exactly know how that would look, and this feels like a more significant change than most of the rest that are coming out of this API review, but I thought that would be worth some discussion here. Does anyone have strong feelings about a struct for port for those reasons?
It sort of feels like another one of those extensions in search of a use case to me. Like we've come all
That's
this way
fair.
and no one's wanted it. It's like, okay, maybe, I don't know. Or you could wrap it in a struct and not do any harm, but port ranges and all ports seems kind of niche to me.
I think that. Sorry, you
Go ahead. You go,
No,
James.
you go.
Fine, I'm gonna go. So I think that if we can come up with a good, not derived example of port ranges, then it might be worth it. But until we can come up with that example, which I think that's what the last person who was talking was basically saying. But like produce the example and then yeah, maybe it's worth it.
I think the problem from an API design point of view though is that if we don't have the struct there now, then it'll be a breaking API change to put the struct in later.
It's true. Yeah, that's what I just think as
Yeah.
long as we can just say here's why, then yeah, do it. And definitely it helps with like in the future if we want to do fancy things with ports.
That's it,
You
John.
wouldn't need to break the API. You just need to add a separate field and make it a one-off or something.
Yeah.
Well,
John made the same point that you could add a ports field that would have, yeah, so you can either specify the port singularly or some more complicated thing.
Yeah, I think like there are paths that we know. It's just that it's very awkward, especially looking at the IPv6, IPv4 transition and what had to be done on network policy. So given, for example, all ports is a upstream proposal that seems to have some legs and lots of demand, like this is like future proofing, knowing a bit about the future versus just simply future proofing. So I just wanted to caution your tale about network policy because I think people were not super happy about that evolution.
So I have no objection to wrapping it in a struct. That seems generally harmless. I think all ports in the context of the gateway API seems to me to be pretty different to all ports in the context of, network policy. Network policy is all about matching, and all port and being able to match from any port seems really useful. Being able to listen on all ports seems like you're doing some sort of low-level traffic filtering, which is sort of which is really a use case that we haven't discussed in much detail.
Mikhail?
I'm certainly having trouble fathoming it.
Yeah, I have an example, but I'll let Mikhail talk first.
Well, right now we really have two fields for port because you have to keep in mind port includes, you can have TCP port 80, you can have UDP port 80. So right now it's a little weird that you have two fields. We have protocol and we have port for the port number. Presumably this port struct, I imagine it would subsume both of those. And so if you have, HTTP 1 or 2, you have TCP port 80. And then if you also want quick, you'd add another port for port 80 on UDP, right?
Not necessarily. Why would you need to do
so
that?
I think that the thing there that we're doing is again, this runs into the problem that the protocol field currently conflates like sort of multiple level things, and like it's the protocol field is more like a listener type than a actual protocol. I think that the thing we sort of suggest for what Mikhail is talking about is that you should actually have like a separate listener for each thing that just references the same sort of routes. Like for quick, you have a listener that's UDP 80 or whatever, or 443 or whatever. And then you choose the same set of routes, pointed to the same set of routes, and that should be the guidance we give rather than having one listener that has like 3 protocols on it. You have like,
I guess the way I'd always imagined HTTP3 support was that there would be no change to the gateway API. You would just, as an implementation, possibly as an implementation knob somewhere, you would just enable HTTP3. When you asked
because
for
it's delivered
HTTP,
because it's delivered via UDP, like it requires specific config. Like, you know, you have to say, yes, expose this UDP port. You can't just be like, make it UDP.
We know what the port is. We know what the port is. We don't specify. We just specify, here's a port. All you have to do, I mean, the gateway specifies, I want to talk HTTP, some version, and I want it to be on this port. And anything else is up to the implementation. You can say, we interpret that to mean all versions of HTTP on all the appropriate ports, and we're going to do the right thing.
That's not what we have right now. We have an explicit GoDoc comment. Well, I don't know if this shows up in the CRD, but it's in the Go code, so I assume it applies. HTTP means accepts clear text HTTP 1.1 sessions over TCP.
Yep. Yeah, I think Harry's right. This is probably a discussion async. The thing I wanted to put in here was that one of the things that people were talking about all ports for was for using a gateway for an even lower level gateway. So like an IP route gateway, GRE tunnel gateway, something like that works at more like that works more like a sort of a router, essentially, because there's actually not that much difference between describing a TCP, like an IP route, than what we have already. And so like that's what people are thinking is like, well, you could use this to do that. And so so that's what I think people are thinking is like, well, you know, how you could extend this to IP route or other sorts of custom route. If you don't have to, if you mandate a port, then it means that you can only ever go as low as layer 4. So I think that was the example I was thinking of. I think the thing that we need to do here is we need to be a little bit more clear. So I think it is 100% clear that this is not clear, right? Like that this needs to be clarified, and that this behavior, this behavior that HTTP as a protocol type implies all of this stuff, absolutely needs to be specifically, explicitly documented. So that there is no magic, that it's all written down very clearly as to exactly what happens. I think that the more we have magic happen, the more we risk people doing different things, which we really, really don't want to do. I don't think that what James is talking about is necessarily that bad an idea, as long as the expected behavior is documented. You know, like if HTTP means any version of HTTP on this port and implementations can do what they want, that's okay to some extent, but like that needs to be written down, and that needs to be clearly communicated as the expectation. If we want to be more explicit, I think that's okay too, but that needs to be written down.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think this is really, the discussion we've had so far really points to 2 separate discussions. One is that the use cases for all ports, or just a port struct in general, how we might expand that in the future and what that could look like. And then the second one is really where the conversation led to, which is related but slightly different, of what does HTTP mean as a listener or protocol type on gateway? Because if our spec currently states that it's specific for HTTP 1.1, that is probably more specific than we want, it seems. So those seem like 2 places that we need clarification. Does that line up with what everyone else is getting out of this discussion?
Yes,
Yeah.
for me.
Okay, cool. If anyone wants to add follow-up issues for that, that's great. If not, I'll plan on it after this meeting. But if you do, just link them in this agenda at some point. The last one in this view on Alpha 2 feedback, I just tried to highlight some overall themes here. The other one is there's a lot of discussion about validation. In this case, I should be more clear about our webhook validation. Because that's in the APIs directory, that ended up getting included in our API review. I think the fixes for the webhook validation comments are pretty straightforward. So if any, and it's actually real Go code instead of just API type. I mean, everything's real Go code, I guess, but this is, if you want to write a little bit of code, this is, or fix code, this is a great way to do that. So does anyone want to volunteer to respond to the comments on these tests and fix them?
I will take this.
Awesome, thanks. I hope I get your GitHub username right.
Just a Susan.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, I'll just do that. Great, thank you. All right, so we've gone through a lot here. Let's talk about RC1. There's a lot in here that we can still do as we work towards the final V1 Alpha 2 release, but we need to figure out how much of it we need to do before our first our first release candidate. Thanks to Nick, we already have a great changelog ready to go. It's a PR that's been out since sometime last week anyway. Thank you. So we're really close to being able to just cut a release candidate. The question I have is, do we want to try and get any of these changes in before that release candidate? My guess is that at a minimum, this port struct and this kind of resource change are changes that are larger in scope and going to take longer than we want to wait for an RC. Does that seem accurate?
I agree.
Okay.
I would say so.
Okay. So given that, the only question I think that leaves us with is if we want to try and sneak this PR in, the one that fixes, I don't know, maybe 40 or so of the comments from our Signet API feedback. To me, it feels close enough, and it would make me feel a little bit better about getting a release candidate in, but it is not something that has to be a blocker in my mind. So I wanted to, see what others think here.
I agree. We should get that one in and then cut the RC after that. The
Okay.
reason I'm in favor of getting the RC out as soon as possible is that it lets implementers get started on their V1 Alpha 2 support immediately.
Yeah.
I certainly want to be able to get Contour moving on the V1 Alpha 2 support, because we've got there's huge code changes, and I think the more that we can give people time to do that, and then they can come back around and fix further things in RC2 later. But this gives people a go module point in time to point to get everything working with that, and then we can add more things on top of it. Yeah,
no, I agree with all that, with everything that you just said there, and I really like the end goal here of being able to, as we release V1 Alpha 2, be able to point to at least some experimental implementations or something of the API that have already been working on release candidate 1, release candidate 2 or whatever. I'd hate to make a big splash with V1 Alpha 2 and have no way to try it out. This is something that came up at the last meeting, so I agree with everything there. So RC1 will.
Susan had something to say as well, though.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, I didn't mean to say anything.
Oh, okay. No worries. All right.
Sorry, I try and keep an eye on who's unmuting to make sure that everyone gets the chance, because it's easy to speak over each other. Sorry.
Oh yeah, but yeah, that's fine. Actually, I do have one question. I mean, do you have an issue tracking the webhook validation?
No. So let me. I can help point this out. But this is all in that massive PR that it will probably take several attempts to load. But when you actually see all these comments, one of the files changed specific. Well, whenever it loads. There are probably 15 comments on the validation in here specifically. So we have some webhook validation files, just I think validation.go, something like that in here. where we have some code that could be cleaned up, and that's all.
So it looks like it's because our web hook validation functionality. I mean,
Yeah.
it's slow. When we load in all those PRs, we can see it's really like loading in progress.
Oh yeah. The reason this PR is slow is just because it's a fairly large diff, but I think mostly because we have way too many comments. I mean, it's great to have this many comments, but I think it's just pushing GitHub to the limit here.
Okay.
But I can try. I think I've got a handle on most of the comments, so I can try and make them an easier to grab format. And at a minimum, I have this PR loaded on another browser somewhere that I can share. So yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So I had a question, Rob, on the first topic for the agenda. Do we need a gap or we can go the change?
Yeah, that's okay. So good to bring that back up. Bowie, I think you're back here now. So I think we generally reached consensus among whoever was on the call at the time that we were fine with removing extension ref. But Bowie, I wanted to make sure, do you have any concerns about removing this?
I think just a short gap be sufficient, because it is something that's been there for a while. So if we're removing it, probably it makes sense to just write down why and why it would come back, right? Because if we make the decision to remove it, and then someone's going to probably ask for it to come back. And what that would
that's
be.
fair. Okay, that's fair. I'll get the gap out in a couple days.
Okay. That makes sense. And if we can just get an issue today or tomorrow, just so we can add it to not the gap itself, but just so we can add it to the milestone so it doesn't get lost.
I'll do that. Yep.
And then, okay, great. All right, well, we are almost out of time. We have 5 minutes left. We have confirmed that RC1 will go out soon. We just need to get this one last fix in, well, set of fixes in. We have plans. I think assignees, people have volunteered to take on most of these items, which is great. In the last few minutes, we've got a little bit of time for PR and issue triage here. Is there anything that anyone wanted to highlight? Anything that we need to take another look at here that I've missed covering so far?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is if more people take time to view the API and see what we can rip out to avoid making changes. I think that probably isn't part of one specific issue. I have gone through the issues a couple of times to see if is this change a breaking change or not, and point issues out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and something like we should all keep in mind that we've been working on this API for a while, and I know I've learned a lot just by spending some time and reading through the API spec that we've kind of cobbled together through a bunch of different PRs, and everything in isolation made sense, but clearly some of the things we added didn't all line up together. So finding things that, like the extension ref that made sense at the time, but maybe aren't as necessary now, would be great to find now. Well, we still have this big opportunity to make a breaking change, which we hope not to do for future releases. So yeah, completely agree with that. Let me run through the PRs real quick here. Looks like everything has been, does anyone have a PR that just needs one last round of review that's kind of gotten stale? I'll take silence as great. I'm going to keep on reviewing these PRs as we go. We have so little time left. I don't think it's worth trying to get into any one of these PRs. I would say the same for issues, unless anyone has one they really want to call out. I would say we can take our 2 minutes or so back and call this a day. Does that work for everyone?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks everyone. Have a good one.